I'm a surgeon who worked a 24-hour shift on Christmas. My parents and brother told my teenage son he wasn't welcome at the family dinner in the house I bought them. They pushed him out. So I took action. The smell is the first thing that hits you when you come back to the world. Not the coppery tang of blood. You get used to that. It's the sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic fighting a losing battle against the deeper, muskier odor of human fear. For 24 straight hours, that had been my world. A world contained within the trauma bay of County General. A world of screaming monitors, bone-deep exhaustion, and a quiet, frantic choreography of saving lives. I was scrubbing out, my hands raw under the scalding water. The movement was automatic, a ritual I'd performed thousands of times. 10 scrubs for each finger, back and forth, up to the forearms. A surgeon's penance. My reflection in the steel of the dispenser was a ghost. A man in his mid-40s with the eyes of someone much older, dark smudges of fatigue painted beneath them. My name is Dr. Marcus Thorne, and I was on the tail end of a Christmas Eve double shift. The last case had been a bad one. A multi-car pileup on the icy interstate. We'd worked on a young woman, maybe 20, for 3 hours straight. There was a moment, a gut-wrenching, heart-stopping moment, when we thought we'd lost her. Her pressure bottomed out, the steady beep of the monitor devolving into a single, piercing keen. But we'd pulled her back. My hands, the same hands I was now scrubbing clean, had literally held her heart, massaging it back into a rhythm. We'd stabilized her. She would live. In here, in the OR, chaos had rules. There was a protocol for disaster. You clamp the artery. You stabilize the bone. You intubate and you push the drugs. You fight the chaos with logic and training until order is restored. It was a brutal, bloody, but ultimately understandable world. It was the other world, the one waiting for me outside the hospital doors that I couldn't seem to figure out. The world of family. Out there, the wounds were invisible, and they'd been festering for 20 years. I dried my hands, the rough paper towel a welcome friction against my skin. My phone, liberated from its locker, buzzed with a single text. It was from my wife, Sarah. She was an architect, a woman who built things that were designed to last, a stark contrast to my work of patching people up. She was flying in from a conference in Chicago. The text read, "Just landed. Survive the flight. Try to survive your family. Love you." A small, tired smile touched my lips. She knew. Of course she knew. My son, Alex, was 17. This year, for the first time, he'd been granted permission to drive himself to my parents' house for the annual Christmas Eve gathering. It was a 3-hour drive, a rite of passage he'd been looking forward to for months. He was proud of his new license, proud of the beat-up but reliable sedan I'd helped him buy. He was a good kid, quiet, thoughtful, with a mind for mechanics and a heart that was still, thankfully, open and kind. I felt a familiar pang in my chest. A mix of pride in the young man he was becoming and a low-grade, ever-present dread about sending him into the lion's den alone. My family, they weren't lions. Lions were noble. My family was more like a pack of hyenas, circling, testing for weakness, always ready to laugh as they took you down. I shrugged on my coat, the weight of it feeling heavier than usual. The drive home was a blur of streetlights on wet asphalt. My mind drifted, unbidden, to a phone call from 3 weeks ago. A call from my older brother, Leo. He'd started the conversation with a syrupy sweet tone he only used when he wanted something. He asked about work, about Sarah, about Alex. All questions he didn't care about the answers to. Then came the pitch. A can't-miss investment opportunity. He and a buddy were going to salvage a failing craft brewery. It was a sure thing, a guaranteed winner. All he needed was a little liquid capital to get in on the ground floor. $25,000. I remember leaning against the kitchen counter, the phone cool against my ear. I could picture him perfectly, leaning back in his chair, a smug look on his face, already spending the money in his head. "Leo, I can't swing that," I'd said, my voice measured and calm. It was the voice I used to deliver bad news to anxious families. "I'm already carrying the mortgage on Mom and Dad's place. You know that. And with Alex's college fund, things are tight." It wasn't a lie, not really. But it wasn't the whole truth. The truth was, I could have found the money. The deeper truth was that I was done. Done funding his string of failures, his sure things that always ended with him in a deeper hole and me writing another check to bail him out. The warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp frost. Right, he'd said, the word dripping with sarcasm. The priority, of course. God forbid Dr. Perfect spares a dime for his screw-up brother. I mean, what's one more failed dream to you? You got it all figured out. There was a pause, thick with resentment. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. We always do. He hung up before I could reply. I knew that tone. It wasn't just disappointment. It was the sound of a grudge being sharpened. It was a test of the old family hierarchy, the one where Leo's want came first and my role was to facilitate them. And I had failed the test. I knew there would be consequences. I just never imagined they would choose to deliver them through my son. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, just after midnight. A deep, unsettling quiet. Sarah's flight had been delayed further. She wouldn't be home for another hour. The silence in the house felt different from the usual emptiness. It felt heavy, bruised. I saw it as soon as I walked in. Alex's overnight bag, a battered North Face duffel he'd had for years, sat by the front door. It was zipped shut, packed, and ready to go. A silent testament to a journey that had been cut short. Then I saw him. He was sprawled on the couch in the living room, still in his good jeans and the new sweater he'd been so proud of. His phone was on the floor beside him, and he was staring at the dark ceiling, feigning sleep. The posture was all wrong, too stiff, too deliberate. It was the posture of someone trying to make himself small, to disappear. "Alex," I said softly. His eyes opened instantly. There was no grogginess, no surprise. He'd been waiting. "Hey, Dad, you're home." His voice was flat, monotone. The voice of a teenage boy trying with every fiber of his being not to show how much he was hurting. "What are you doing here, buddy? I thought you were staying the night at Grandma's." He sat up slowly, swinging his legs to the floor. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at his own hands, turning them over as if he'd never seen them before. "Yeah, the plan changed." I sat down in the armchair opposite him, the springs groaning in the silence. I didn't push. I just waited. I knew this terrain. With Alex, patience was the only way to get to the truth. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. They said there wasn't a seat for me. I blinked. "A seat where? What are you talking about?" "At the table. For dinner." He finally looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw a universe of humiliation. I got there right on time. Walked in, said hi to everyone. Grandma came over, and she just looked flustered, like I was a delivery guy who'd shown up at the wrong address. She said they weren't expecting me, that they didn't have room. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach. "What did you say?" "Nothing." I was confused. I could see the table. It was huge. They had 2 tables pushed together. Uncle Leo was sitting in my usual spot, next to Grandpa. He just smirked at me. Alex's voice cracked on the word, and he swallowed hard before continuing. He said, "Guess some of us are more essential personnel than others, kid." And then he laughed. Nobody else did. But nobody said anything, either. Not Grandpa, not anyone. My own breath caught in my chest. The casual cruelty of it, the targeted nature of the insult, was Leo all over. Using a term from my own profession to wound my son. So I just stood there by the door for a minute. Alex continued, his gaze returning to the floor. And Grandma came back and said she was sorry, but with everyone there just wasn't a bed for me to sleep in either. She said she didn't want me driving home so late, but she didn't know what else to do. It was obvious she just wanted me to leave. "Did anyone offer you a plate? Did you eat?" He shrugged, a gesture meant to convey indifference that only highlighted his pain. The table was full. I told him it was okay. I wasn't hungry anyway. He paused. "Dad, there were empty chairs." I counted. There were at least 3 empty chairs at the end of the other table. That was the detail that broke me. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a miscalculation. It was a choice. A deliberate, calculated act of exclusion. A single thought, cold and sharp as a scalpel, cut through my exhaustion. I built a fortress of financial security around my son, and the wound came from inside the walls. I failed as his protector. It wasn't just rage I felt in that moment. It was the icy, gut-churning certainty of my own failure. I had built a life designed to shield him from the ugliness of the world, and I had willingly sent him into the one place I should have known was the most dangerous. So I left, Alex said, his voice regaining a sliver of its strength, as if recounting the facts made them less painful. I just turned around and walked out. Nobody tried to stop me. He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. I made some toast when I got home. I got up and walked into the kitchen. There it was on the counter. A single slice of bread, cold and slightly curled at the edges, on a paper towel. His Christmas Eve dinner. The sight of it was more damning than any accusation. It was an artifact of cruelty. I leaned against the counter, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles ached. I couldn't sleep after that. Sarah got home an hour later, took one look at Alex on the couch and the toast on the counter, and her face, usually so open and warm, became a mask of cold fury. I told her everything in a low, seething whisper while Alex pretended to be asleep. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she simply said, "This wasn't an oversight, Mark. It was a power play. They used our son to punish you for saying no. The question isn't if we do something. The question is how precisely we make the incision." After she went to check on Alex, I sat alone in the dark kitchen, the ghost of that sad piece of toast haunting the counter. My mind, a place usually occupied by surgical protocols and patient charts, became a screening room for a lifetime of memories. A highlight reel of paper cuts that had finally led to a severed artery. The scenes played out, sharp and vivid. I'm 14. I've just won the regional science fair. I spent 3 months building a fully functional robotic arm out of scrap electronics. I'm showing my father the blueprint, explaining the circuit board I designed myself. He's barely looking at it. He claps me on the back, his eyes already scanning the room for my brother. "That's nice, son. That's real smart. Hey, Leo, tell me again how you talked that cop out of a speeding ticket on the way here. Now that's a useful skill." The memory of his dismissive praise, of the easy laughter he shared with Leo, still stung. I'm 26, a third-year resident drowning in debt and working 100-hour weeks. My parents call. Leo has totaled his car again. It's his third one in 5 years. They need me to co-sign a new loan for him. He just has such bad luck, Marcus. My mother's voice had pleaded over the phone. You're the stable one. He looks up to you so much. I remember the feeling of being trapped, the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. I co-signed a loan. Leo missed 3 payments the very next year, damaging my own credit. I'm 38. It's 7 years ago. I've just handed my parents the keys to the 2-bedroom house I bought for them in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Their finances were a wreck, their credit shot. This was my solution, my way of ensuring they had security in their old age. My mother is crying, her tears a mixture of gratitude and relief. My father, beaming, puts an arm around me. "Thank you, son," he says, his voice thick with emotion. "This means the world to us. This means Leo and his wife and kids will always have a proper place to come for the holidays." Even then, in a moment that should have been about their security, the gift was immediately reframed around Leo. The house wasn't for them. It was a stage for Leo to hold court, a place for him to be comfortable. I sat there in the dark, the ghosts of the past swirling around me. These weren't just old grievances. They were data points. They were the clear, undeniable symptoms of a systemic disease. And the thing about a disease, the thing my entire career was based on, was that you couldn't ignore it. If you let it fester, it would spread. It would consume everything healthy around it. The incident with Alex wasn't a paper cut. It was a metastasis. The cancer had spread from me to my son. I stood up and walked to my home office. Tucked away in a filing cabinet was a folder, neatly labeled Parents' House. Inside was the deed, the mortgage statements I paid every month, the property tax records. All in my name. I pulled out the documents. My hands were steady. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. The decision was no longer a decision. It was a diagnosis, and the course of treatment was clear. The conversation with Sarah had been brief and clinical. We were no longer a family in crisis. We were a surgical team planning a difficult but necessary procedure, an excision. Christmas morning arrived with a cold, brittle sunlight that made the frost on the lawn glitter like broken glass. The world felt hungover, hushed. Sarah and I drove in silence. There was nothing left to say. The plan was set. I held a crisp legal envelope in my hand. Inside was not a Christmas card, but a formally drafted 60-day notice to vacate the premises. It was polite, legally sound, and utterly final. The street where my parents lived was quiet. A few cars lingered in driveways from the previous night's festivities, including Leo's minivan. We didn't pull up to the house. I parked down the street, got out, and walked up the familiar concrete path. Every step felt heavy, deliberate. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't knock. This wasn't a conversation. It was a notification. I carefully tucked the envelope into the seam of the storm door, where it wouldn't blow away. I was back in the car, just closing my door, when the front door of the house creaked open. I saw my mother step out in her fuzzy pink robe to grab the morning paper. She saw the envelope, her brow furrowing in confusion. She plucked it from the door, tore it open, and began to read. I watched her face in the rearview mirror. It was a slow-motion study in emotional collapse. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to a stark, bloodless pallor. Her mouth opened, but for a second, no sound came out. Then she screamed. It wasn't a yell. It was a raw, animal shriek of pure outrage that ripped the quiet morning air to shreds. Frank, my father appeared in the doorway, still in yesterday's rumpled clothes. What the hell is it? She's throwing us out, my mother wailed, pointing a trembling finger down the street at my car. That ungrateful monster is throwing us out of our house. Leo stormed out behind them, a mug of coffee in his hand, his face a mask of smug fury that melted into shock as he saw the paper in my mother's hand. He snatched it, his eyes scanning the page. He looked up, his gaze locking with mine in the mirror, and his face contorted into a snarl of pure hatred. I put the car in drive and pulled away. I didn't speed. I drove calmly, leaving their chaos shrinking in the mirror behind me. The surgery had begun. By the time we got home, my phone was already buzzing like an angry hornet. Missed call, Mom. Missed call, Dad. Missed call, Leo. I sat on the counter, face down. It buzzed again and again, a frantic, vibrating tantrum on the granite. After the 10th call in as many minutes, I picked it up. It was my mother. How dare you? She shrieked. No hello, no preamble. After everything we've done for you, you've lost your damn mind. I held the phone an inch from my ear, her voice a tinny, distorted screech. In the background, I could hear my father yelling, "If you do this, you're no son of ours." You hear me? No son of ours. Did Alex get home okay? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. The question stopped her for a half second. What? What does that have to do with anything? You are threatening your own parents, you selfish. I hung up. The calls continued. Then the text started. A waterfall of digital poison. From Leo. You think this is a game? You just signed your own death warrant. You're dead to this family. From Dad. Your mother's having chest pains. This is on you. From Jessica, Leo's wife. Enjoy being the man who made his own parents homeless at Christmas. I'm telling everyone what kind of monster you really are. They didn't ask why. They didn't mention Alex. Not once. It was never about their actions. It was only about my reaction. I blocked their numbers. But the assault wasn't over. Later that afternoon, I sat slumped in my armchair, the adrenaline having long since worn off, leaving behind a hollow, trembling exhaustion. The phone, now silent, felt like a bomb on the counter. I looked at Sarah. My God, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. What am I doing? She's my mother. I'm making my parents homeless. The enormity of it, the violation of every societal norm, crashed down on me. I was the villain from a fairy tale. Sarah didn't argue or try to reassure me. She came over and knelt in front of my chair, taking my hands in hers. Her grip was firm, grounding. "Look at me, Marcus," she said, her voice quiet but intense. "They made our son feel homeless in his own family, in his own skin. You didn't start this war. You were just finally choosing a side. You are choosing him. Don't you dare waver now." Her words were the splint on a broken bone. They didn't heal the break, but they held it steady. The next morning, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. Of course, it was my mother, still in the same fuzzy robe, her face puffy from crying, her eyes narrowed with righteous fury. She was holding the eviction notice, now crumpled and damp. I opened the door but stood in the entryway, blocking her path. "You're really doing this?" she hissed. "After all we've done for you?" I let the question hang in the air for a moment. "What exactly have you done for me, Mom? Besides take the house I bought you? And the money for the bills I paid? Was it before or after you let my son sit in a car for 3 hours, only to be turned away on Christmas Eve?" She flinched. "Don't be dramatic. We didn't have room. There were 3 empty chairs. You did it because I wouldn't give Leo $25,000 for another one of his failed schemes. You used my son to send me a message." Her face hardened, the brief flicker of guilt extinguished by a wave of indignation. "Oh, for God's sake, stop acting like we're the villains. You are tearing this family apart over a childish misunderstanding." Then she did something so theatrical, so utterly delusional, that I almost laughed. She held up the crumpled letter like evidence in a trial, and she ripped it in half, then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to my doormat. "There," she said, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "It's fixed. Now, if you want our forgiveness, you will call your brother and apologize, and then you will give him the money he needs for his business. We can put all this ugliness behind us." That was the moment I realized they were living in a completely different reality, a reality where they were the perpetual victims and I was the ungrateful, automated teller machine who was malfunctioning. They hadn't heard a word I said. They didn't believe I would follow through. To them, I was still just awkward, serious little Marcus, the boy who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw his way. "That was a copy," I said, my voice as calm and flat as a deadline monitor. "My lawyer has the original. The clock is ticking." I closed the door on her stunned, disbelieving face. A week later, I was having coffee with Dr. David Ramirez, the hospital's chief of surgery and a man I consider friend. I needed an outside perspective. I needed to know if I was insane. I laid out the entire story, the facts, the history, the final incident. I didn't embellish. I didn't editorialize. I just presented the data. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, stirring his black coffee. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes clear and direct. "Am I a monster, David?" I asked, the question feeling small and pathetic in the open air. He set a spoon down with a soft click. "Marcus, last week, you and I stood over a patient for 6 hours and amputated his leg below the knee to stop a runaway gangrenous infection. We cut off a part of his body to save the rest of him. Was that a monstrous act?" "No," I said. "It was necessary." "Exactly," Ramirez said, leaning forward. "You're a surgeon. You know that sometimes the only way to treat a cancer is to cut it out. It's not clean. It's not painless. It leaves a scar, but you do it to save the body. What you're doing with your family, you're not being a monster. You're just the only one in the room willing to be the surgeon." His words didn't absolve me, but they framed my actions in the only language I truly understood. It wasn't an act of rage. It was a procedure. The 60 days passed in a storm of silence. I had my lawyer handle all communication. They refused to move, clinging to the delusional hope that I would blink, that I would cave as I always had before. They were wrong. I listed the house. The market was strong. A young family made a full-price offer within a week. Their only condition was vacant possession. I didn't go on the day they were officially removed. The new owner's legal team handled it with sheriff's deputies. I heard it was an ugly, tearful scene. My parents' furniture, the furniture I had helped them buy, piled on the lawn. A public spectacle of their own making. As expected, Leo, the ever-dutiful son in public, took them in. He and Jessica moved my parents into their spare bedroom. The press tour began immediately. The extended family was treated to a series of sorrowful phone calls from Leo about my cruelty, my instability, how my fancy job had made me forget where I came from. That lasted less than 4 months. One afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. It was Leo. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was frayed, thin, and stretched to the breaking point. "You did this," he rasped. "No hello. You have ruined my life." I didn't say anything. I just listened to him unravel. It's a nightmare, Marcus. A living nightmare. Dad criticizes my job, my car, the way I mow the lawn. Mom follows Jessica around the kitchen, telling her she's loading the dishwasher wrong. They complain about the noise from my kids. They fight with each other constantly. I'm going insane. Jessica is threatening to leave me. He took a ragged breath. You have to help. You have to do something. Co-sign a lease for them on an apartment. Just a deposit. Something. I listened to the desperation in his voice, the frantic plea of a man being crushed under the weight of the very people he had championed. And I felt nothing. No pity. No satisfaction. Just the quiet emptiness of a closed door. I'm not the family's problem solver anymore, Leo, I said, my voice even. You wanted to be their hero. You wanted to be the center of their universe. Congratulations. You got it. I hung up and blocked the number. That was the last time I ever spoke to my brother. I heard through an aunt that he eventually gave them an ultimatum. Find their own place, or he was leaving his own family. They ended up in a cramped, two-room rental on the bad side of town, the kind of place they'd always looked down on. Their pensions barely covered the rent and cheap groceries. The life of perceived middle-class comfort I had provided was gone. 2 years passed. 2 years of quiet. 2 years of peace. It was a warm Saturday in October. I was in the driveway with Alex, now a 19-year-old engineering student home from college for the weekend. We were putting the final polish on the '68 Mustang we had spent the last year restoring together. It was his car, a project that had filled the quiet spaces in our lives with the smell of grease and the sound of shared labor. He was a different person from the humiliated boy on the couch. He was confident, funny, his eyes bright with purpose. He wiped a smear of wax from the chrome bumper, his smile easy and genuine. You know, he said casually, not looking at me. For a long time, after that Christmas thing, I thought it was my fault. Like, maybe if I'd been funnier or cooler, they would have wanted me there. I stopped polishing and looked at my son. It was never your fault, Alex, I said, my voice firm. Never. It was my fault for letting things get that bad for so long. I nodded toward the gleaming car. The money from the sale of that house. That's what's paying for your tuition. Your grandparents' cruelty is funding your degree. We turned their ugliness into your future. If that's not a victory, I don't know what is. He looked at me, a deep, knowing understanding in his eyes. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that. Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. Just 4 words. I hope you're happy. I read it, and for a fleeting moment, a shadow of the old weariness passed over me. The echo of a pain that was no longer there. A phantom limb. Then I deleted the message, erased it from the world without a second thought. I turned back to Alex, who was now telling me a long, complicated story about his thermodynamics professor. He was laughing, his voice clear and free in the autumn air. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. The calls and texts still come sometimes from new numbers like ghosts rattling at a locked gate. But the silence that follows is real. It's the sound of peace. It's the sound of a protected border. They said there was no room for my son. So I made a choice. It wasn't a choice between love and hate, but between a diseased limb and a healthy body. Between their chaos and his peace. I chose to save the body. Tell me, did I finally go far enough?